Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
You know, I've listened to you like since Julian gave me your album with Jim Black, Life in Dublin, and
oh yeah.
then I played with Tom also quite a lot, Rainey, and then I followed what you did, and so I love your music and composing and everything. So
great, thank you.
And I wanted to start with something I listened yesterday. I didn't know you did that alone with the Marcustico. What was that? It sounds amazing, man. The sound is like incredible, but also what you play, is and I've read it's completely improvised. And how did you come with this?
It's what's now 2 years ago somebody would have said what when you'd said this, but when I say it's a lockdown project, everybody now knows what it is. So basically, I needed to find I when the lockdown started, or when the whole thing started in March 2020. At first, because I didn't have to go anywhere, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. At last the practice time I haven't had since I was a young person. When I was young, you're younger, you have more practice time. That's just the way it is.
Sure.
That's the way it should be, of course. But anyway, so I was thinking, I'm going to get so much practice done. I'll be able to develop this and that. And so I started practicing like a maniac. But I ran out of steam, like in a month or 2 months. It's like, what am I practicing for? At the beginning, of course, there was uncertainty as how long this would last, but it became kind of clear after a while that this wasn't going anywhere soon. And I really ran out of steam, creative energy, and all of that. And the same with composing, which has never happened to me before. Never. Really. It's shocking. It was kind of shocking, actually, for me. I've never had an issue with being creative or feeling like I want to be creative or wanting to play music or wanting to write music. My first gig was in 1979, which is, it's 43 years ago, So I've been playing professionally for 43 years, and I've been, playing the instrument for longer than that. So to suddenly come at this stage in my life, to suddenly realize that I actually don't feel like playing. I don't feel like picking up the instrument. It was kind of shocking, actually. And I decided that I needed to do something to focus at least something, and the instrument especially. And so I had this beautiful instrument, which is the Marcustico, which is made by a luthier in Spain, Victoria Gasteiz, and he has evolved this thing. He's trying to get close to a double bass sound with the bass guitar, and it sounds like that. It really does, and it's an extraordinary instrument. I didn't know about it until a couple of years ago, when Dario Deida, the great Italian bass player, was playing it with Kurt Rosenwinkel, my son, who's a guitar player. He's of course he's always checking out what Rosenwinkel is doing. All those guys, they all arrive at the altar of Kurt eventually. But those young guitar players. But so he said, "Have you heard this bass player?" And I was listening. He was playing it in the house, and I was saying, "No, I was here." Saying, "Yeah, he sounds good." I looked over and I said, "Jesus, that's a bass guitar." Because I really had thought it was a. Now I've since been in touch with Dario about this, and he really has done a lot of work into even reinforcing even more the feeling, the acoustic bass sound. So anyway, I decided I needed to, because I've been playing acoustic bass guitar since 1983. I got my first one, and I've been playing various variations on that instrument ever since. I play electric a little bit, sometimes I do, and I got the Citron bass about 10 years ago, which is perfect for so much stuff. It can be completely electric or completely piezo, but this was a different beast altogether. So I really. I got the instrument, but I've never played it with. Up to this day, I have still never played it with anybody.
Oh shit! Yeah,
because I got it, the pandemic hit, couldn't go into a room with anybody, you know. So and in Ireland, it was very strict lockdowns here.
Yeah.
There's been no music, no gigs have only started in the last 3 weeks since.
Oh,
March
really?
20, March
Really?
2020. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's been one of the strictest lockdowns in the
Wow.
world, actually, and longest. So so I decided I really needed to do something to keep my creative thing moving, and I decided it would be, you know, an obvious thing to do is to play that instrument, you know, to try and learn it. So what I would do is, I'm up in my music room in the attic here. This is where in my house. I would, every time I came up, I plug in the instrument into the recording thing, and I would play 3 pieces completely improvised.
Oh, okay.
So basically, I play a piece, stop for a second, play another piece, stop, and play another piece, and then put the instrument away, and do this over a period of time. And I had like 3.5 hours of music. So eventually, I decided if I'm going, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make an album out of this, and I'm going to choose the tracks that I want and all of that. So this gave me kind of a framework and a
Focus. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and then I put it up in Bandcamp and
Yeah.
gave it away. I mean, amazing, because it's such a big market for solo bass albums.
It's like, man, it's like, I was thinking like solo bass, like especially let's say electric or acoustic in this case. I know only Michael Manring. He did this, like and Jonas Hellberg, you know, the bass player who played with McLaughlin in the 80s. He did like a solo bass, but of course you have Dave Holland and, you know, the jazz, but like on the kind of electric bass, solo bass, it's a rarity.
There's actually very little, although I have to admit my role models in that area are Dave Holland and you know, Michael Formanek has done a really great one as well.
Oh yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. So that was kind of my model, and I did that, and I have, but to be honest, I've done these before. Every 2 or 3 years, I make a solo bass album.
Yeah, I saw that. Believe me, right? You did like, I saw it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I did one on my the other acoustic bass guitar that I played for a long time, that is actually in the school where I teach at the moment. And I did that a long time ago. Actually, the first one I ever did was on the first acoustic bass guitar I ever got in 1991.
Wow.
And another lockdown project that I did, by the way, is you can see these cassettes behind me. Cassettes.
Yeah, sure. Oh, you digitalizing them?
What happened was,
man, good.
My professional life coincided with the invention of the Pro Walkman. Right, the Pro Walkman came out in the early 1980s, and you know, a guy of your generation, you can't really understand what a revolution that was for us, because before that you had to, you know, there was just live recording. You know, a guy would have to bring in a big box, you know, and like a, you know, and it was expensive. You know, you had to either have a guy who was a total maniac and bought one of these machines, you know, or a professional record company, you know. So live recordings were very rare, and then suddenly overnight anybody could do it. And so I was starting to play in Ireland here, and these machines appeared, and they were cheap. I mean, relatively cheap. They're still expensive compared to, say, buying an MP3 player now. But so I recorded everything, and they've been sitting on cassettes for 35, 40 years, and then I've always said I must digitize them, you know, because, and then this year I had time, so I bought a USB cassette player with a USB on it, and I connected it up to Audacity. I would get a cassette, I would press play, and it would record, and I would just go and do something else, because it's real time, of course, you know. And I was lucky enough, you know, that I was geeky enough at that time to write dates and personnel.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I'm completely geeky. I mean, if I look at this, it says this is Dev Sherma. This is from 1996. It was recorded March 24th, 1996, and then there's the personnel on it, you know. So
wow.
So what I did was I would go back to Audacity, and then, you know, you'd see the audio stream, and you could see where the tracks ended, because you'd have applause if it was live. And so I would just chop them out, and I pretty much knew the tunes, or I had them written on. Often I had them written on the things, and I digitized them. I put them on Dropbox, and I put a little Word document with the personnel on the top. So now I have over 135 concerts, and what it is, I'm not saying that all of this is of great brilliant musical value, but in terms of Irish jazz, it's like an archive. It's like an archive of that period, the 1980s, which was not documented very much.
Incredible.
And for many of I was young, I was in my early 20s, so a lot of the guys I was playing with were older than me, and a lot of them are gone now, and so it's kind of amazing to have this. It was also interesting to listen to myself playing at that period, because it's frightening. So, but because you listen now and you go, oh God, how did those guys stand me, and oh, how did I get that kick? And but what's interesting is, because there's so much of this music and it goes over a period of years, I started to hear the evolution of the playing, as I went along, and realizing it's almost like listening to one of my own students these days, and to hear things kind of drop into place. That kind of sounds, oh yeah, that's a bit better, and now, yeah, that's better, like that kind of stuff. So that was kind of interesting from a kind of educational, anthropological, historical point of view, from my point of view.
Very, yeah.
And I am planning to try and create an Irish jazz archive in the university where I teach. So this is a really good resource to have, at least. Unfortunately, I'm playing on nearly everything. But these are the breaks. What can you do? And then, of course, the mini disc appeared then, and so I've actually a stack of mini discs. So that's the next project, is to do some of those.
That's amazing.
Again, you have to do them in real time. So that was another lockdown project, and one I'm really glad I did. And the other thing I was kind of doing a lot, actually, is kind of what we're doing now, is actually talking to people, and because everybody was at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I was talking to people all over the world, friends of mine that I know, but I hadn't seen for a long time, and we just talked, and it was really both helpful and kind of therapeutic.
That's what this was for me. I felt really helpless in a way. So I was like, well, I got to do something to keep my mind in. I mean, I was practicing and doing these lockdown projects, but still, at least interacting with musicians if I cannot play, in a way. So that's really, for me, was like, I'm a jazz geek also. Like, I have encyclopedias to read about that. So I was like, man, okay, well, let's start doing this. So yeah,
you're a man after my own heart, as they say in Ireland.
No, but I love doing this. But Ronan, I wanted to ask you just this: like you mentioned before, you started playing the acoustic bass. When I have you on records, I always wanted to ask you, how come you decided for the acoustic bass? I seen footage, of you with Louis Stewart playing Donna Leaf in 1984 on YouTube, and it's so cool because he's playing and he's just looking at you all the time. He's not looking at his fretboard. It's just like, and you're there, like, it sounds so cool. But how did this story with you and the acoustic bass start, and why the acoustic bass?
Question. I mean, actually, that recording is 1980. I was
80. Oh wow.
1980. Yeah, I was 22.
Wow.
But my own story is that I'll just give you very briefly. My father was crazy about jazz and classical music, and he wasn't a musician, but he was crazy about it. So, and he played it in the house all the time. And he had speakers hooked up to the downstairs rooms of the house. So if he was playing a record, you couldn't get away from it.
Oh, wow. So, that's beautiful.
And he was into jazz from 1945 onwards, so modern jazz, and he was into classical from 1880 onwards. And because of this thing of him playing music all the time, I was literally raised with, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Bartok, Sibelius, Mingus.
All the greats.
It was an extraordinary music education to have in Ireland in the late 60s, very conservative country. Really, when I look back at it now, it's just unbelievable. The advantages to later to becoming a musician and a composer, you know, talking about having a background. So, but I was a very late starter, actually. I didn't buy my first instrument till I was 18. And
Really? Wow.
yeah, really, I was a really late starter. I was electric bass. It was the one that you saw me play on that video.
Oh, wow.
It was a, what was it? It's quite a well-known instrument, you know, I mean, quite well-known. I can't remember the name now, but this actually, it'll come back to me. Anyway, that electric one, I wasn't listening to electric players. I was just listening to acoustic players. So why wasn't I playing double bass? Because I couldn't afford one,
Sure.
basically. And in Ibanez, that's what it was. It was
Right.
in Ibanez. And then somebody gave me a double bass, which wasn't a good one. Here, try this out, and it just sounded horrible. And you know, because it was a terrible bass, you know, and it was hard to play anyway because it's, you know, big instrument. And I just, no, I can't. The only thing I could possibly afford is to buy a bass like this, and it'd be so much of a struggle technically and physically. I probably wouldn't enjoy it. So I think I'll stick with what I have for the moment. I hadn't got a plan. And then in 1983, I had a student I was teaching privately, and he came in with an echo bass, EKO, an Italian instrument, and it was acoustic bass guitar. I've never seen anything like this before. And he said, what do you think of this? And I played it, and I thought, to quote George Orwell, I have seen the future, and it works. But unlike him, I was right, actually. He was talking about when he went to Russia and the communist country there, you know, he thought that was, I've seen the future and it works. No, George, sorry. But anyway, but I was right, though, you know, it was the future. And I bought the instrument off him. Actually, I swapped it for
Really?
an
Oh, wow.
because he didn't take, I don't know where he got it. It must be one of the first ever. And I played that instrument up to 1993, I think. And in 93, then I had one made for me, which was an instrument I played up to the time that I got the Citron bass, which I think was in 2009.
Okay.
But the Citron bass, I've been playing that pretty much exclusively up to now, up to fairly recently. I still play it. And now I've got the Marcustico. So there's been a kind of a history of this. And to be honest, I you know, apart from the fact that I really like the instrument, it was a bit easier for me to be remembered by people. Oh yeah, he's the guy who plays that weird, you know, instead of being you know, bass player, double bass player number 100,000. You know, I was one of 5 people playing one of these. You know. And it's still not that common. It's still played,
No.
Certainly not as a principal instrument. Occasionally you get guys playing it. You know, you used to see Dave Holland playing it on one tune or something like that. You know, and
It's basically you, Jerome Harris, I know. I mean, and
yeah, Jerome's been playing it for a long time.
And then, you know, yeah, you know,
yeah, it's
almost that's
so
it. I mean, in the field
so
of creative jazz, let's say,
yeah.
you know, or yeah.
You always found that, you know, you'd always see it on Nirvana Unplugged or something like that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Kurt knows how it's playing 3 notes.
That's the story of how I came to play that, you know. But, actually, the video of me playing with Louis, I have to tell you, that was terrifying. Absolutely.
How did that happen, actually? I mean, that gig with him.
I was playing with Louis. I mean, he was the giant, you know, figure. He'd been to London. You know, he played in Ronnie Scott's band. He was the guy who showed us in Ireland that it could be done. That a guy from Ireland could go out and be international. You know, he was a pioneer, and he was an incredible guitar player. I have some stuff now on. I'll send you some. I'll send you something from my archives. That will you'll need to have a stick to put under your jaw, because the guitar playing is frightening. You know, he was a genius, you know, and the most extraordinary guitar player. I mean, at the height of his powers, one of the greatest guitar players ever in jazz, you know, and technically, physically. I mean, that the Donna Lee one is great, but actually the other one from that, the Morning of the Carnival, if you have, I don't know if you've seen that, check that one out. That guitar solo on that is beyond belief, you know, and it's kind of like around what I was experiencing every night, you know, playing with him.
Wow.
So anyway, we were playing, that was the Cork Jazz Festival. It was at the Opera House. It holds about 1,000 people. So there am I. I'm only playing, you know, the instrument for 4 years. I'm only playing professionally for I'm only playing professionally for like 6 months, and suddenly I'm on the stage with this guy. And the reason we're strung out in that weird configuration is because Louis Belson's big band were playing after us, and they had behind the curtain is the whole big band set up, and they didn't want to,
to expand, yeah.
So they just put the curtain, and we had to play like that. So it's this weird kind of setup, and so it was recorded by the television. So there's these, and it's not like the modern cameras; it's these big cameras on wheels, like going around. So I'm there. There's 1,000 people there. There's guys with cameras, and I'm sitting down and plugged in. I turn out, and out of the corner of my eye, about like 5 meters away from me, it's Joe Pass.
Really?
He's standing there smoking a big cigar in the wings because he's come to check out Louis, of course. They all knew Louis and they all knew him. And so I'm there going, Jesus Christ, it's like the cameras, 1,000 people playing with Louis Stewart.
And Joe.
It was terrifying. But of course, when I listen to it now, Louis Stewart and John Wadham, that drummer I played a lot with John. He was the drummer at the time in Ireland, and John was great that night too, of course. And Jim's still around, actually. The piano player's the only one who's still alive for himself. But that was quite an experience. It was a baptism of fire, and yeah, really, really it was. And that year I also played in Ronnie Scott's with Louis.
Oh wow.
2 weeks in Ronnie Scott's. That was also, when I think back on it now, that period, I remember playing, Billy Cobham was there and Perry was there. Ronnie Scott's was like people coming in all the time. And I was also playing in Ronnie Scott's, and I have a cassette recording of that too, So it was an amazing period because I was playing with Louis, because Louis was such a big figure. It's a bit like playing with Miles Davis, right? In the Irish context, suddenly you were somebody. Suddenly people knew who you were. Oh, he's that young bass player playing with Louis. So everyone was calling me because I was playing with Louis. I was now the anointed one on the bass, right, at the time, and I was getting calls right and left, and I was playing 4, 5, 6 nights a week.
Really?
It was unbelievable compared to now. I don't just mean pandemic time now, but
yeah, sure.
Just a different era.
But how was the scene in? I'm familiar with the U.S. jazz scene in the 70s, let's say 80s. I know it, the European also, but like the Irish jazz scene, like how was it? Like gig-wise and everything, like music-wise. Yeah.
Yeah, it was tiny, and it was because it's a very small country. People often forget just how small Ireland is. I remember talking to a guy from Egypt one time, a friend of mine, Fatih Salam, a great piano player who lives in Cairo. And he said, there's 23 million people in Cairo, right? So he said to me, how many people are there in Ireland? And I said, 5.5 million. And he said, no, I mean in the whole country. And I said, 5.5 million. And he said, wow, he said, there's 6 million people in my neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly.
So the scale is very small, and of course Ireland was, at that time we were not the kind of cosmopolitan, internationalized country we are now. So we were quite an agricultural country, poor, very poor, and so jazz had difficulty penetrating, and it was a very small scene. In Dublin, mostly based in Dublin. There were some other scenes in Belfast and Cork, but mostly in Dublin. And it was music was played very straight ahead by some players at least who were really good at it. And for me, it was I learned the music in a way that Americans would have learned the music 30 years before.
Yeah.
So basically, being on gigs with guys, you were supposed to know 150 tunes. No one would tell you anything, there was no school, there was no,
sure,
you tried to pick up information anywhere you could, and you got your ass kicked a lot of the time.
That's the best.
Yeah, it can be. It can also be pretty brutal.
Yeah, sure.
I remember one time I was playing with a piano player, and we were playing night and day, and I was playing D minor 7 flat 5 as the first chord, which is not right. It's A flat major. But anyway, after the tune was finished, the piano player turned around to me and he said, "What chord are you playing that first chord there?" And I said, I was like 20, you know, like, and this guy was very experienced. So I said, D minor 7 flat 5. What chord are you playing? And he looked at me and he said, "I'm playing what Cole Porter wrote."
Whoa.
That's all he told me, you know. Now, of course, that's kind of brutal. But on the other hand, guess what I did? I went home and found out what the right chord was, you know, because I didn't want to ever be in that situation again.
Yeah.
I remember being in another situation with another piano player, very good one. He said to me, "Do you know Cherokee?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can we play it in all the keys?" I said, I don't think I could do that." He said, "I know, you'll be fine. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4." And we start playing. And you know, the thing about that, as opposed to say learning in a jazz school, is that I had to do it.
You have to get it. Yeah.
There's an audience there. What am I going? "Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not doing that. You know, in front of everybody." So I had to play, and guess what? I could play it in every key. Now, not every key was as good as every other key. You know, some keys were pretty ugly, but I got through it, and I do think that education that I had, which was very similar to, you know, the stories you read about guys sitting in and all of that kind of stuff. I remember another time I was playing at a jam session in Dublin, and I looked over at the piano, and Tommy Flanagan was sitting there.
Oh wow!
I knew he was in town, right? But so Tommy Flanagan's sitting there, and I'm, oh shit! And then so I was with Louis. I sat in because Louis was playing, but I didn't know that Tommy Flanagan was going to be playing. So I'm there, and Tommy's there, and so Louis says, "What do you want to play, Tommy?" And he says, "3 little words." And I went, "Oh shit! Never played that in my life, right? Didn't know it at all." I'm going, and the piano player who was playing, an Irish guy, very good piano player, he's walking past, you know, to let Tommy play. And I call him, I said, "Do you know the changes to 3 little words?" And he says, "Yeah, but I don't play the bass," and walked off.
Ooh, oh man, that's mean, actually.
Yeah, totally mean. So that was what it was like, you know. In the
rough,
end, Louis, I think, told Tommy that he wasn't quite sure about, which I think now was not true. I think he knew it. Of course, he knew it. He just knew that I didn't know it, and so he kind of saved me, actually. And then said, "Well, maybe something else." So Tommy went, "Yesterday's," and I went, "Okay." So I was saved.
Oh man.
That's
tough.
Those were the way we learned, and we learned in an old school kind of way. It was you know, I see both sides of it, because I ended up, you know, being a founder of a jazz school, and I see the advantages of formal education, and I see the disadvantages.
Me too.
And there are certain things that I learned because of the way that I learned that I would have missed out on, I think, if I'd just been going to class and really learning the music that way. You develop instincts, you develop problem solving mechanisms, because it's live.
Fearlessness,
yeah.
Or originality. I think originality is like definitely.
Yeah, well, certainly an ability to figure it out for yourself, because you have to. Because nobody's going to show you anything, and they figured it out for themselves. And I think that's something that's been lost to some degree. I noticed it with students, especially in the last 10, 15 years, that really they want to be told what to do, or what they can do, or you know, or they want to be told how to figure out everything. They want a magic bullet for everything, you know, and especially in the era of the apps. But you know, so I think. But on the other hand, you know, I was doing really stupid stuff for years that could have been sorted out for me in 10 minutes by the teacher. You know? So it's kind of a balance. To try and get a balance is the thing, I think.
Definitely. Yeah.
I don't regret at all.
No, that's incredible experience. I mean, you know, that's how everyone, you know, like the most classic Charlie Parker story, you know.
And also,
So
you know, at
kinda...
that period, you know, in that period in Ireland, the scene was starting to change. Everybody played standards. There was no originals being played at all. But I was kind of, you know, I always had this desire to compose, you know, and I started writing little tunes, and I was lucky enough to play with a great guitar player called Tommy Halferty, whom I still
with Keith Copeland, right? We did
exactly.
yeah, sure.
So Keith, sorry, beg your pardon, Tommy and myself and John Wadham, the drummer who's on that video, we had a trio for about 2 or 3 years. It was very experimental for the time. We played free, we played fast, we played solar at like 350 BPM. You know, it was really great, and we had a residency in a theatre. We played every 2 weeks or something like that. We played for about 2.5 years.
It's important.
So it was a great way to develop the music, and I became very interested in the idea of programming music and playing music of somebody. You know, this is very common now, of course, you know, playing Wayne Shorter's music or playing Coltrane's music. And in 1986, I got to go to the Banff Centre.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how did that happen? Yeah, because I've read, you know, you had the privilege to play and study with Dave Holland.
My brother is a drummer, Conor. He's a drummer, and he went and lived in New York for 1.5 years in early 80s, and he studied at Drummers Collective and, you know, all kinds of stuff, and then he went to I don't know how he heard about it, but he went to Banff in 1985, and he told me, oh, this is amazing, you have to come, you know. And it was Dave Holland was the head of the program, Liebman was there, and so I applied, you know, made a cassette, and I was accepted, and off I went, and I was there. It was 3 weeks at that time, and it was life changing. It was life changing because, I mean, it still is like that now. It's a very different kind of, you know, summer school, if you like, or jazz summer school. It was really about, first of all, everybody there was of extraordinary high standard, you know, everybody, and there were no beginners, or it was all. Secondly, it was all about concept, you know, and about different kinds of music to play, different ways of thinking. It wasn't, you know, this scale with this chord kind of, you know, regular kind of teaching. It was, you were supposed to, you know, try and think differently. And because you were working with the faculty was Dave Holland was the head of the program. And so he essentially had a lot of his then quintet with him. So Steve Coleman, Kenny Wheeler,
really,
Marvin Smitty Smith.
Oh, come on.
Julian Priester.
Priester, yeah.
And then Liebman was there, Richie Barak was there. And so if you were a saxophone, it was 4 weeks that time. If you were a saxophone player, you had 2 weeks of Dave Liebman and 2 weeks of Steve Coleman.
I mean, yeah.
John Abercrombie was there, Richard Abrams, George Lewis, Don Thompson, great Canadian bass player and vibes player. And so you were just exposed to this stuff like day after day. And ensemble class, you'd be put into an ensemble and you'd have a different ensemble coach. They didn't like to be called teachers, participants. We're all participants, apparently. But anyway, so you'd have like Kenny Wheeler coming in with his tunes one day, and then Steve Coleman his the next day, and you know, it was just an extraordinary explosion of ideas, creativity, different ways of thinking. You know, and it was hugely influential on me. It was absolutely a turning point for me creatively in all kinds of ways. I've had a very long relationship with Dave Liebman since then, but that's where I met him and Richie.
That's how it happened. Okay.
I remember, I still remember the first day, right? So there's 50 of us there. Where nobody really knows anybody else. They're mostly Americans. There's a few Germans, actually quite a few Germans, and me, token Irishman. Anyway, so we didn't know. You know, everyone's kind of nervous first day. What has to happen on the first day is we have to play, and so that the guys can hear us. So now there's only 3 teachers there. So at that point, but we're all there in the room, and then in walks Dave Liebman, Dave Holland, and Richie Barak, and sit down. They sit down, right? And Liebman's got a clipboard.
Oh.
And they go, okay, come on, bass player, you know, piano player, pick a tune, go up, play, and they sit there. And so, it's really, and we're all getting a chance to see each other playing, of course, but it's also very scary. And I was the last one up, and there was 6 bands, but there was only 5 piano players. So, we need a piano player, and then Richie goes, "I'll play," and he gets up and sits at the piano. So I'm sitting, oh Jesus, like Richie Barrett, who I have all these records of.
Sure.
There he is sitting at the piano, and we play "Autumn Leaves." I still remember this, and counts in. He plays this chord, like it's like a triple slash polychord.
Oh yeah,
absolute Barrett.
Richie, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and the thing is that I was quite experienced at this point, even though I was still in my 20s. The point is, I was actually a lot more experienced than a lot of the guys on the program, because a lot of them were very fine players, but still in college, American colleges. So real jazz geek guys,
yeah.
American jocks. Oh man, this orange juice is awesome. Let's play giant steps in every key. Those kind of guys. So real But a lot of them didn't have much playing experience, but I'd had loads of playing experience, and I'd had loads of experience of, having to think on the spot. So, but I'm playing with Richie, and but I'd always play with guys who would often play a lot of chord substitutions, but they would be based on a kind of a bebop way of thinking, tritone subs, side slipping, 2/5s, all that kind of stuff. But this first chord that he played didn't come from any book that I ever knew. And I'm there trying to catch what it is. Of course, no chance, because he's now playing a second chord that is equally weird. And so I'm there and I'm going, what the hell am I going to do? So I just say, okay, just close your eyes and play. And that's what I did. And I didn't worry about it. I just played. And I started to realize that anything I could do, he could make it sound good, And so I started playing all these weird pedals and all kinds of things. And he would, come charging in. And it was really, really great. And I still remember Richie, like we finished and he goes, "Yeah, man." I don't know, do you know Richie? You know the way he talks?
Yeah,
yeah man. That sounded cool. And then leaves there, he goes, was he playing a bass? Because it's acoustic bass guitar, right? Because it's 1986, so it's really unusual. And I still remember Richie going, "No, Lieb, it's a fucking guitar." I still remember saying,
"Oh my God, that's awesome."
So that was a huge thing for me to meet Liebman, Abercrombie, whom I played quite a bit with later on, and Richie, of course, and of course Steve Coleman, monstrous influence on me. He really
like composition wise or
everything.
Yeah,
huge. I mean, rhythm. Forget
rhythm.
About it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Rhythm thing is just his thing. Still, it's still.
Yeah, he's.
Yeah, and he was like, we'd all these. I still remember a lot of guys didn't like what he was doing because it was so original.
Yeah,
they would get pissed off. So these young jazz jocks, they could play anything, any key, and he would come in with a tune with 6 bars on it. Right?
Yeah.
In 4/4, and nobody could play it, right? And 4/4, what the fuck? Everyone was like, what? Now nowadays, people kind of know about this, but in those days, it was like, this was him talking about, and he explained to me. I'd heard him on Dave Holland's first album, Jumping In, and I loved what he was doing, and I was thinking, he's playing in the changes, but he's not playing the changes. Yeah. So I went up to him the first day he arrived, and I said, "Hi, Steve, I'm Ron." I said, "I want to know everything you're doing." And he kind of took a few steps back, because I think he was quite used to, I think at that point, getting a lot of resistance to what he was doing from more traditional players. So I think he was always ready to have to fight his corner
to attack in a way.
Yeah. And so to have somebody come up and that changed everything. I mean, not changed it because I didn't know him before that, but I have to say he was totally open. He showed me stuff, he shared stuff, and I still have notes here up my bedroom where he showed me his symmetric system, how it worked, and he had systems for everything,
Yeah.
And they were original, and I truly believe that he's maybe the first guy since, Coltrane maybe to really question the fundamentals of rhythm,
and harmony also. Yeah, yeah,
all of it.
yeah.
So his thinking was huge on me, you know, and I checked out everything he did for years, and I know him very well, and I did even do a recording with him that didn't come out, but
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
yeah, well, he recorded a lot at one point. He'd go into the studio on Systems 2, and I was in New York, and he said, "Do you want to record a track?" And I said, "Yes."
Oh, wow.
So
sure.
went into the studio, and he said, I mean, this, you know, he's a very original thinker, and he said, "What are we going to play?" He said, "Well," he said, "when were you born?" And I said, 5th of March 1958. He said, "What day was that and what time?" I have no idea. He said, "Could you find out?" I said, "Well, I guess my mother might know." He said, "There's a phone there. Do you want to call her?" So I called my mother. I called my mother back in Ireland. Hello. And she goes, "Oh, are you in New York?" He said, and I said, "Yeah." She said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Yeah, everything's fine. What time was I born?" So he actually had a way of generating harmonic information from birth dates. Right?
Yeah.
So he took my birth date, Ramesh Shotham's birth date, the percussionist, Andy Milne, and his, and he composed a piece on the spot, and we recorded it. That's what it was. So anyway, but he was hugely influential on me in terms of my thinking about rhythm and about a lot about music, you know, and you know, and to be honest, one of the biggest things that I got from him was the realization of the connection to Africa of so much of what we do.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of whether we realize that or not.
Definitely.
And that's become that became quite a big theme for me, and is even bigger now than it was then in terms of in my own head. You know, the connections between the ways of playing music that come out of West Africa, not just the music, you know, not just, oh, it's 6/8 and it's syncopation, not just that stuff, but also the way music is played, why music is played, all of that stuff. So much why we do a lot of the things that we do as jazz musicians are directly related to that. So much of this music came out of West Africa, and that was hugely influential on me. So by the time I came back from Banff, I was a changed person. 4 weeks later, I was not the same guy as I was when I was just absolutely buzzing with ideas and concepts, and not just from Steve, but also from Dave, of course. I mean, I'd never had a bass lesson in my life. You know, it's totally self-taught. So the first bass lesson I ever had was with Dave Holland. It's like I'm sitting in a room with Dave Holland going, you can imagine the impact that had, you know, on me.
Sure.
It was extraordinary. So that was a great and life change, and I had the great pleasure and honor of going back there as a teacher in the early 2000s.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, just for a year. I did it one summer. Kenny Werner invited me to do it, and I was up there for teaching for the summer school. Kenny Werner was one of the he was the artistic director. I think Dave did it, then Steve did it, then Hugh Fraser did it, great trombone player. Then Kenny, then Dave Holland, then Dave Douglas, and up to very recently Vijay. Yeah. So I think Vijay finished this year, but I'm not sure who hopefully it's still going because it's such a great program.
It's incredible. Everyone, you know, it was your generation is, you know, I did this talk with Benoit Delbecq, you know, the piano player.
I met Benoit there in '87.
Yeah, he said like Banff was for him also like complete, you know.
Yeah, I met Benoit there in 1987.
Yeah, see, yeah, like.
So there you go. Like I met Simon Nabatov there. You know Simon?
Oh yeah, you did that do a record, right? Like line, but
that's where we met. Was in Banff. Simon said to me, "Oh, you're from Ireland." He said, "I know an Irish drummer, and Conor. Do you know him?" And I said, "Yeah, I shared a room with him for 20 years. He's my brother. You know, that's my brother." So Simon had got to know Conor in New York. Before he came to Banff, so he knew Conor before he knew me. But yeah, I met Simon there. Met a lot of Andy Laster.
Oh yeah,
great.
Yeah, Andy's amazing. Yeah,
fantastic guy.
Yeah,
Michael Sarin, lots of really great, Brad Shepik,
Hmm.
lots of great players that are still around. A lot of them are
Yeah,
still playing because at that point, the guys who were there, they were already high level, so it was probably only going to go one way for them. You know what I mean? In other words, they were already on the path. So
yeah, yeah.
it was.
I mean, you mentioned all these guys now, like who are related really strongly to the creative New York scene. And you seem to maintain these strong connections also with, Tom Rainey, and you did that record with David Binney, which I love, by the way. Amazing tunes there. The Telemachos and that in the Fairness, I think it's good. That's beautiful stuff. But like, and with Jim Black, with all these guys, how did this connection with New York happen with you? And did you ever go there for a longer time, or?
No, I've never. No, I've been back and forth, but I, for example, Andy Laster at one point. Andy doesn't play as much as he used to,
Yeah.
but at that point he was very active, and he and I were good friends from Banff, and we did a project together. We played at the Knitting Factory. We did a project where I wrote half the music, he wrote half the
Oh,
music,
really? Oh, wow.
and he we played it in Dublin and we played it in New York, and it was the trumpet player Kung Fu.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it was Kung, Andy, myself, my brother, and a trombone player, Irish trombone player, and what really influenced me. I mean, I met Tom Rainey, funnily enough, in Lisbon with Mark Johnson, whom I got to know quite well. I was playing with John in Lisbon, but John also played the festival there with Mark and Tom Rainey, and they were hanging around for a few days, and I ended up cooking dinner for a bunch of musicians. I love to cook,
Oh, yeah.
and
Me too, by the way.
yeah, great. I ended up cooking for Mark Johnson and Tom Rainey. So, and of course, I was listening to Kenny Werner's trio records at that point, and so, they're so incredible. And I just thought Tom was, and of course, at this point, you have to remember, I was madly into rhythm, like madly into it. Now I still am, but I'm not quite as evangelistical as I would have been in those days. But and Banff kind of really turned me onto that, and to some degree. But also, this Lisbon Festival was a really important one for me, and it's a story that I often tell. I'd just done several weeks with Dave Liebman, and I was then doing a couple of weeks with John with Abercrombie, and we ended up in Lisbon with John, and then the festival was on, and I went to see lots of music. And it was all kinds of stuff. Oregon with Trío Gurtu and Kenny Barron's quintet, David Murray. There was loads of stuff on there, and I remember sitting in the dark in the auditorium listening to somebody. It might have been Kenny Barron's group or whatever, and I just and I'm there going, I've just been had a really intense time with all these extraordinary musicians, and then I said, what is it makes these? I remember thinking this. What is it makes these guys great? Is there any one thing that they all have in common that makes them great, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I came up with was they all can do at least one thing that nobody else can do, whatever that is. And it can be all kinds of different, a sound, a way of playing, a rhythmic thing, a harmonic thing,
Composition, yeah.
Anything, yeah. It can be something that differentiates them. They are themselves in a way that nobody else is. And so they have a thing. Each one of those guys has a thing. So I started thinking, what's my thing? Do I have a thing? At this point, I'm like, 28, 29, something like that. And I'm a very experienced bass player, played loads of gigs at that point. And I'm starting to think, is that me? I don't mean just, but am I a gigging bass player? Is that what I am? Or do I have something else? So I remember flying back to Dublin from Lisbon and thinking about this. I mean, seriously thinking about it. And then thinking, well, if I think about I also realized that if you're going to find your thing, you're probably going to find it in something that you love and something that you're good at. It has to be a combination of those two things, I think, personally, to really develop something that's strong. I think you need to have a certain kind of appreciation for it, and you need to have a certain talent for it, I think.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about this, and I realized, is my thing melody? And so I said, well, not really. I mean, I do love melody and all of that, but it's harmony. I've always, at that point, I'd always struggled with it because I was not taught properly, so I was always kind of figuring stuff out. So that had always been kind of work. But the one thing I'd never had to work at was rhythm. I was always good at it. And when I listen, I talk about earlier listening to the cassettes of myself playing with Louis and all that, and I'm thinking how did I ever get asked to play on those gigs? And Jesus, it's terrible. But I have to admit, the time is very good. I'm not saying that in an egotistical way. There's no ego in talent, right? Because talent is, everybody's talented in the world. Everybody. They're just talented at different stuff. And I happen to be good at playing in time. And it was something that I liked. And so I thought about this. I thought, that's probably where I'm going to find my thing. So when I got back, I started to write. What I did was I got a cassette player. I played into it. So I just improvised. And then I played it back and I started writing out some of the stuff I was doing rhythmically. So, and it was an eye-opener. I said, wow, yeah, that's triplets. Wow, yeah, okay. But what happened if I started applying the intellect to what I was doing? Supposing I did this, that, and the other. And then so I started talking to my brother, the drummer, and then a great guitar player called Mike Nielsen. I don't know if you know Mike.
Yeah, sure.
Bad motherfucker.
Yeah, amazing player. Yeah, so underrated. Yeah,
completely. So Mike and I, Mike, myself, and Conor, we at that time we weren't as busy as we later became, and we used to rehearse 3 times a week in the drum room in the music school, like a padded cell, where we tried out all kinds of weird and unnatural experiments with rhythm, and we were completely maniacs. Completely maniacs, and we became obsessed with rhythm. Like supposing you do that, and the rehearsals were like, maths conferences.
That's how you got into the metric modulation and all that stuff, like researching it.
All of that stuff. Yeah, all of that stuff. And well, if you do that 15 times, 4 times over 7, it comes out. It was all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember a particular one where I realized what maniacs we'd become. I was watching a TV program and they were talking about the brain and how it functions and how it perceives things. And the guy who was talking, he said, "No, I have this pencil here." He said, "How many times am I tapping this pencil?" And he went, ba, da, da. And the person who was interviewing him said 3. He said, "Very good. Now how many times?" And he went, like real fast on it. And I went, 14. And then I suddenly thought, what the fuck am I doing? I've become a complete maniac. So we were rehearsing the next day, and I said, guys, we're gonna have to cool out this rhythm because I'm going mad. I said, I was watching a television program last night. And there was a guy talking about the brain, and he had a pencil. And Mike goes, "Oh yeah, 14."
Yeah.
So we both do things. So we became complete maniacs, and the rhythm book that became out of that, that really was a function of me hanging out with Dave Liebman the following year in Lisbon again. And Liebman's like the eternal student. He's an extraordinary guy. What are you doing? What are you listening to? What are you reading? He's amazing, and he stays so kind of interested in everything.
Fresh.
And he said, we were hanging out, and he was, we were playing some gigs, and he was asking me, "What are you doing? What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, we're kind of getting into this rhythm thing. Me, Mike, and Conor. We'd done some gigs at that point. Like, what kind of stuff?" I said, "Well, it's just." I thought he'd know this stuff because he's one of the greatest musicians in the world. And I thought I didn't think what we were doing was unique at the time. No idea. So I said, "Well, we take triplets and then we put it over that." And then he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, so I played it. I said, "Well, like this." And he looks at me and he goes, "What the fuck are you doing?" I said, I thought he just didn't really. I said, "Well, just a triplet thing. It's just blah, blah, blah." I have no idea what you're doing. Show me some more of that shit. So I started showing that you guys are working on this. Yeah, he said, "You got to put this in a book." Just leave him. I told you.
Yeah.
You got to put this in a book. It's got to be involved. There's nothing out there like this. No. And he kept at me, about it. And eventually I put it into a kind of a pamphlet that I would give out at master classes. And we started to develop a reputation for this. I mean, now a lot of the stuff we were doing, everybody's doing it because the world has changed. That's
it's different, yeah. But
yeah, but at that time, I mean, we did a master class in Berkeley in 1993.
Oh wow!
And we were, and it was packed, and we were doing stuff now, playing all the things you are in 7. People were like, oh my God, now of course, everyone does it, jam sessions. But, and it's funny, I was, Claudia Quintet were in Dublin about 4 or 5 years ago, and Matt Moran, the vibes player, and I was talking to Matt, and he said, I saw you in Berkeley in 1993. He said that workshop was unbelievable. We had no idea what the fuck you guys were doing. And so it was funny, it's funny looking back at it now. And we made an album, of standards in 93, in which every standard's in an odd meter and everything's reharmonized.
Oh man!
Wow. It was called. We were going to call it "Fucked Up Classics," and it was just one unfortunate thing after another. So we made the album, and we sent it out to all these record companies. Of course, like 3 Irish guys, never heard of what this weird shit. I mean, nobody was interested. Absolutely nobody. And then it was recorded onto a DAT. By the record by the studio, and the studio moved and lost the DAT.
Oh shit!
So it's never been released. I listen to it now, and even now it sounds we were really, way ahead of our time at that time. We were doing some really interesting things, and we kind of got a reputation. We played with a lot of people as a rhythm section. So we played with Sonny Fortune, we played with Liebman, Kenny Werner. We played with Kenny Werner. We played with Conrad Herwig. We played with loads of guys. We were kind of the go-to modern rhythm section if you were coming to Ireland. But we also got a bit of a reputation now, and Kenny Werner told me a funny story. He said he came to play with us in '95, and he said he was flying back from Japan, and Nussbaum, whom I didn't know at all at that point, Adam Nussbaum, and Kenny said, "What are you going to?" "I'm going to play in Dublin." And he looks at me, "You're going to play with those two brothers?" Like me and my brother. And Kenny said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh man, you're in serious trouble. Those guys are," he was talking about, how difficult everything was. Of course, Kenny was in no kind of trouble with us, because Kenny could play anything. He was actually one of the few guys that came to us where he played some of our music as well as us playing his, because most of the time they didn't. They would ask us, "Do you want to play one of your things?" And we just said, "No, it's fine," because we had a couple of embarrassing moments with people where quite well-known guys would ask, "Let's play one of your tunes," and we'd say, "Oh," and then we'd get one of our tunes and they couldn't play it, and it's always a little bit awkward, so we would stop suggesting it, or if they asked, we'd say, no, let's just play your stuff, but that was, so I really got into this rhythm thing, and I really got into composition at the same time. I was into it anyway, but I saw Bobby Previtt's band in Austria in 1993. I saw a gig. Andy Laster was in the band. Kung was in the band. I mean, it was a heavy duty band.
Monster band, yeah.
Lindsay Horner, a very good friend of mine, was playing bass, and Bobby was writing the music, and it was all extended form compositions. And I remember sitting there, and again, it was one of those I've seen the future and it works kind of things. And so I made an album called Dev Sherma, and for quintet, and I wrote all these extended form compositions, and I entered it for the Julius Hemphill composition competition in the States, and it won it in 96, I think. And that was a huge thing for me, and a huge thing because I was Irish, and it was another thing, but it really set me on that path. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the Knitting Factory, and all of those kind of guys, Andy Laster, Kenny Werner's trio, and all of that stuff, New and Used, a band called New and Used. So You asked me this question about how I got involved with these New York guys about 25 minutes ago.
Oh no, man! I love listening to this.
So I'm taking the long way around.
The extended composition, so
Extended composition, yeah. That's kind of why and how I became more involved with them, because there was a conjunction between the complex rhythmic things that I was into at that time and the compositional things that was going on with those guys.
Yeah.
That really worked for me. So it was a very natural thing for me to try and work with the same guys, either on their projects or having them on mine. So that's kind of how that came about. Particularly, I met Jim in Banff, actually. I mean, I knew who Jim was, but when I went there as a teacher, I met Jim. He was teaching as well. And that's how we got to play. And that's how I first played with him.
Yeah, you when you play with Jim and with Tom, with those, I mean, because those two guys are like, as far as drumming goes, I will not even say jazz drumming, just drumming, but it's just like you together. I love that there's like, I think it's with Liebman, and Jim Black from 55 Bar.
55 Bar, yeah.
Man, and it's just watching you and Jim. It's just like,
Jim's burning. I mean,
and he's just like,
you don't normally hear Jim play that fast swing.
Yeah.
It's burning. That was a very interesting period because the IAJE used to be on this big international conference. It's gone now, but used to be on in New York, and I used to go over to it, and we started a tradition of, we would go, me and Lee would play at the 55, and we would have a different drummer each time, but we just play free, completely free, right? So we did it with 4 different drummers. We did it with Chandra Sarjo. I don't know if you know Chandra.
Oh man, one of my favorite drummers, most underrated drummers ever, really. Such a monster. Yeah, I love him.
So Chandra, we did it with Chandra. We did it with Tom. We did it with Jim, and we did it with Nasheed Waits. So
man.
And all of them we did that in that same way. Just played 2 sets completely free, different drummer. Wow. And it was really interesting and fun and all of those things because they all play so different. And the thing with Chandra was interesting because Lee became interested in the rhythmic stuff that we were doing. And he said to me, I've got an idea. He said, this hula dula shit that you do, hula dula shit. This hula dula shit. I'd love to have, he said, what about a trio where he said, I'd love to play that shit. He said, but I don't want to rehearse or practice. He said, so how about do you know a drummer that you could play with and you guys could do that hula dula shit and I just play on top of it? And I said, I do actually. It was Chandler. So I ended up, that's how that happened. And Chandler and I would get into all this complex metric stuff, but improvised, so not we didn't work it out beforehand. And we did a very nice tour with Lee. We played Dublin, we played Paris.
Yeah, there's like footage from Sligo. You play in Sligo.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. Yeah.
That's right. And so we did that. And then after that, I was in a trio then with Rudresh Mahanthappa.
Yeah, I saw that. That's tasty, right? That record. No. Yeah.
Record.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, you know everything.
Oh, I have these records. So.
Yeah, good for you. So that was a great thing as well. Because it was very interesting me playing that because at that point I'd kind of gone away from that, not away from complex rhythmic things, but from thinking about them as being something I really wanted to do and focusing specifically on those things. You know what I mean? To try and do them.
Yeah.
So it had become, in my opinion, my work in the rhythmic area had become more organic and was now more kind of subsumed into a bigger picture, But when we started doing the trio with Rudresh, Rudresh's tunes were nearly all this complex shit, and I've suddenly got to work on that kind of stuff again, which I hadn't done for about 10 years, and I really enjoyed it actually because I'd done all that training years before. How the hell what can you superimpose over something that's changing meter every bar? All that kind of like intellectual work as well. And I had to do a lot of that to play that music. And it was fun. And of course, Chandler ate everything alive,
I have to ask you here because just sorry to interrupt you, but like let's say you have a complex tune, right? I don't know, it's changing 7 and 6 and 11, whatever. How do you play then? Do you like think in it? Do you see like the lead sheet, the rhythmic structure, and immediately calculate like a supercomputer what you can play over, and or how do you deal with these, let's say, complex structures that you actually can then play really over, or do you like put them into smaller units, I guess? And
yeah, it's a combination of things, to be honest. One of the important things is the thing I call the Clave Principles, which is basically that you find the clave of the tune. If you've got something that's going 7, 6, 5, and it's got, assuming that it's got some kind of repeating pattern, you will have some kind of giant clave. If you had something that's, one of the first tunes I ever learned with Steve Coleman was one called Uren, and Uren is in 4/4/4.
Yeah.
The half beat, the way Steve describes it, the half beat is on 3 for the first 2 measures and on 2 for the third measure. That's the form of the tune. So in a way, the clave of Uren is this. It's So that's a long clave in 3 bars of 9 or 3 bars of 4/2, but that's what it is. And you need to know that in order to play that tune. You need to internalize that these moments where it goes. And so these things can take time. They can be very quick or they can be slow. Depends on how familiar you are with them, how easy the clave can be to, what your past experience has been in this area. There's lots of variables. My own thing is that, everything is actually, my own approach is that everything is quite simple. And so basically, without wishing to get too geeky, I believe that everything is about combination of space and relationships. So everything is about space. The space part is that the space is the distance between 2 fixed points. So if we talk about a pulse, we are talking about a fixed point. So let's say you've got that.
Mm-hmm.
So the space is the distance between those things. And so what we put in the middle of that space will define so many things. So
exactly.
If you just divide the space in 2, it goes, you go, in 3, 4, go, 5, etc. Right. So 5, 7s, 9s, whatever. It's just one space is divided into 4, one space is divided into 9. There's nothing more complex about 9 than there is about 4. There's just a question of familiarity. So if I do these things and I play like this, then everything that fits in there, if I can appreciate the distance between those 2 points and see this recurring, I can play anything within there. Right, absolutely anything. So everything like feel is defined by how you put notes in the space. If you have a jazz 8th note feel, and you're playing with the fixed points being on what we might say 2 and 4.
4, that's it. Yeah.
If you visualize what that would look like, you can get a kind of a shape of what that is, which is a different shape to going and then you have something like a Dexter Gordon kind of thing where it's behind the beat.
Yeah.
Right. So then you have, if you go from on the beat to behind the beat, you go, on the beat, boo boo ba beep ba boo ba boo ba ba boo ba behind boo boo ba 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 beep ba boo ba boo ba boo ba boo ba boo. That other one is not getting slower.
No, yeah.
Its relationship to where those downbeats are is different. It's pulled to the left a bit or whatever you want to think of it.
Yeah.
So all the things like feel, groove, all of that stuff is dependent upon this space stuff, right? And then everything else is dependent upon the relationship between what one thing that's being played and whatever else is being played. Now, if you practice exercises that develop your sense of spatial awareness, rhythmic spatial awareness, I call it, and you practice things that that develop your sense of relationships, you're going to have very few problems playing rhythmics. I don't mean just playing 7, I mean playing anything.
Yeah.
Because for me, the complexity of relationship, of rhythmic stuff, is actually not that interesting to me anymore, because I believe all rhythm can be quite complex and also quite simple. So it's not that I'm not interested in 19/15, but I'm not interested in it because it's 19/15.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early period, I would have been totally geeky about 19/15. Oh my, amazing. Now I'm interested maybe as a problem to solve, and the only reason to solve that problem will be because the musical effect
Musically,
is something really different than we've heard before. That's the reason to do it.
Mm.
In fact, it's the only reason to do it.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's just like when I listen to you play, it sounds so easy, but especially with killer drummers, it's then
killer drummers always, well, they do make things easy, but they don't. I mean, actually,
they don't.
I have to say, playing with Tom is not easy. I don't mean that it's, but I don't know. Have you played with Tom?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we toured and did some records.
Yeah, exactly. So
incredible.
Yeah, and he plays full on. He plays like absolutely 110% intensity, even at the rehearsal.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're not familiar with the material, even if it's your own material, it's kind of a bit of a shock when he starts hitting like that, And it's the same. It's the same with Jim. It's like they play absolutely 110% from the minute they start playing. And that's. Yeah. But then again, when I was playing with Keith Copeland, that was the same.
Yeah.
He used to play some of the slowest things ever played. That was so hard.
Yeah, that's. Yeah.
So you have to go to school and teach.
Yeah. Ronan, I have so many other questions, but maybe for the next time,
Well.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.